Geargia was one of the best decks heading into the summer of 2014. It had a ton of really powerful monster cards in the form of Geargia Armor and Geargia X. It also had a lot of fantastic trap cards such as Geargia Gear, and it was a fairly dominant force going into that summer and even the months prior to it. In today's video, we're going to be looking at the Geargia Rampage structure deck, and I mentioned that Geargia were a good deck at the beginning of this video, particularly because I'm not talking about the Geargia archetype in this video. It's been a while since we've looked at bad structure decks, but in today's video, we're looking at the structure deck, Geargia Rampage, not talking about Geargia as a whole. So I don't want to see any comments that say, but Doug, Geargia was one of the best decks 2014, because I know it was, but we're not talking about that. So, like I said, it's been a while since we've talked about a bad structure deck, and the word bad can mean a whole bunch of different things. So it can refer to like the individual cards in the deck, it can refer to the strategy of the deck, and in some ways I actually meant that the structure decks were bad because the theme that they were claiming to be a part of, I didn't feel was like fully fledged throughout the entire structure deck. And in today's video, and part of the reason that I wanted to talk about another bad structure deck is I came up with a new way that a structure deck can be bad. Well, I didn't invent it, but I was thinking of the Geargia Rampage structure deck when I was looking at all the structure decks in an attempt to start this series up again. And one of the things that I noticed was that besides all of those strategy and theme things, a structure deck can be badly timed. It can just be poorly designed, and this one is, I feel there's a lot of thematic issues going on here that I'll talk about as we go through here. But more than anything, the Geargia Rampage structure deck was just poorly timed. This structure deck came out in October of 2014, which is a little too late. The reason being is that by the time this structure deck came out, Geargia Gear had actually been limited, which meant that Geargias were completely off the competitive map. And this also came out slightly after Duelist Alliance came out. And I know I keep delaying that how Duelist Alliance changed Yu-Gi-Oh video, but this is another video where I'm going to mention it. Geargia was pretty much completely irrelevant with the release of Duelist Alliance. Decks like Shaddoll's and Burning Abyss and Satellar Knights in particular, because that pretty much is the same sort of strategy as Geargia. It's a rank 4 based strategy. Those decks completely power crept Geargia out of the game. So by the time Geargia Rampage came out, no one was playing Geargia. I remember going to an event at Voltage Games, which was the store that was used to be ran by Jeff Jones, and instead of our entry packs, which was one OTS pack, or I think they might have been Astro Packs back. Yeah, it's definitely Astro Packs back then. Instead of one Astro Pack for entry, they were giving out 2 Geargia Rampage structure decks. They had that many of these things just lying around, and I think that goes to show that vendors and store owners alike really just wanted to get rid of these things because no one was buying them, and we're going to kind of go over why that was happening. So what does the Geargia Rampage structure deck do that the other sort of structure decks doesn't do? Well, one of the more interesting things about this structure deck is that it actually does have a lot of fairly good reprints, although once again they're late reprints. Geargia Armor is really cool to see. I don't believe it had a reprint before this, but just all the Geargia cards are pretty much in here. You have Geargia X printed as a common. I believe before this was only printed as a super and a secret rare, which makes it really good for players trying to pick up this deck. Although if you're trying to pick up this deck at this point, you're probably you're just not going to do so hot. There were some new cards in here. The best one is Geargia Augur. This card was incredible, and people actually thought Geargia was going to be playable with the release of Augur. They were wrong. The deck didn't really do anything when Augur came out, but it's a cool card in concept, especially in relation to Ancient Gear Box. Is a really cool combo with Geargia Augur, although that card is not in the structure deck for some reason. But yeah, so that's sort of the gist. You have this really good new card. You have some cool older cards. The other new cards, they're not so good. You see, part of the problem with this deck is that it shifts the focus of Geargias from the level 4 monsters, which are actually good, to the level 3 monsters, which are basically the garnets of the deck. Because back in the day, you weren't playing the level 3 monsters because you wanted to draw them. You were playing them to summon them off of Geargia Gear, which I do want to mention was limited at the time that the structure deck came out, because that matters a lot when we take a look at Gearganio MK3, a card that is so clearly designed to be used with Geargia Gear. It's almost laughable that the structure deck came out after that card was limited. So this thing brings out a Geargia monster from your hand or graveyard when it's special summoned by the effect of a Geargia card. Outside of Geargia Gear, which is pretty inconsistent when it's at 1, how are you activating this? Well, you can technically revive it with Gearganio MK2. That doesn't really help because you have to already have access to this card either in a hand or grave at some point. So that doesn't really do anything. I suppose you could bring it out of the deck with Geargia Arsenal. That's not really the greatest play. I can't think of like any situation when you'd ever want to summon an Arsenal, which takes up your normal summon, and then tribute it to summon MK3 instead of Geargia Armor. I mean, when Armor is like your competition, you have to have a pretty crazy effect, and MK3 simply doesn't have that. More importantly, though, this card restricts you from special summoning non-Geargia monsters for the entire turn that you use its revival effect, and boy does that limit you. So the problem here is that Geargia X is not a Geargia monster, which means the only extra deck choice you have when you want to use this card's effect is the new card that was on the cover of the structure deck, and that is Geargia Gear Gigant XG. That is such a weird name. It's like the combination of two other cards and they added G on the end. I can't really explain it, but anyway, this is sort of a cool card. I like its artwork. I always mention that in these videos, that their artwork of the boss monsters is generally cool, and this did really briefly see some fringe play in Burning Abyss decks, but let's read what it does. So it takes 3 level 3 monsters, not looking good so far, although technically if you just resolve 1 Geargia Gear or 1 MK2, you could technically get this card out just by resolving those 1 cards. That's probably never going to happen, but I just want to mention it. So during either player's battle step on an attack involving your machine type monster is occurring, you can attach a material and negate the effects of all face-up cards your opponent currently controls. Also, your opponent can activate cards or effects. These effects last until the end of the damage step, so not a very long lasting effect there. And then also, when this face-up card leaves the field, you can target one other Geargia card in your graveyard. Add that target to your hand. I just want to mention that Geargigant, a card that only takes 2 monsters to bring out, actually has a better floating effect than this card. While this card technically can grab the level 4 Geargias, just in general, the Gigant X special summons it, so it's a lot more useful. Yeah, this thing is basically never going to be summoned in your deck, especially if you're just playing with a structure deck, and it's pretty disappointing because this card does look really cool, and it is sort of a wasted artwork. And it is sort of a wasted opportunity at Konami trying to make Geargia or Geargano MK3 actually sort of relevant. It doesn't quite work out. But one of the other gripes I have with this structure deck is the fact that there's not really any good reprints in it besides the Geargia monsters. We don't really have any sort of cards that sell the structure deck. I think of like the recent Ancient Gear structure deck, and even that had Max C in it. So it had a way for new players to get a card that's really relevant, and not only their Ancient Gear deck that they've just picked up, but also just if they move on from Ancient Gears, now they have a really good hand trap. This doesn't really have that. It actually just has a ton of cards from the Machina Fortress structure deck, which came out like 7 years before. Yeah, 7-ish years before this came out. And like all the cards look the same. It's really surprising. It's like all they did was swap the Machina cards and the Cyber Dragon out for the Geargias, and that's just kind of silly, seeing how old that structure deck is. So you have like the gadgets in here, you have a couple Ancient Gears, you have a Minefield Driller, which I think is like one of the worst cards. It's just so terrible in this deck because Minefield Driller not only requires you to have a field spell engrave, getting that field spell engrave is pretty tricky in this deck because the only field spell you have is Gear Town, and the only Ancient Gears you have are tribute monsters, which makes it really ineffective. No one's ever going to destroy the Gear Town, so it's basically just going to sit there forever until you draw your second copy, and then you just get it back with Minefield Driller, but it doesn't do anything. I just hate Minefield Driller. If you watch the worst card in every structure deck series, you'll know how much I hate that card. But yeah, this structure deck just feels lazy overall. I think that's like the biggest problem with it. It feels lazy. The fact that it's late is really annoying. The fact that it's basically just copy and pasted from the Machina Fortress structure deck is super annoying. I mean, couldn't they come up with something new to put in here? They're even using the same garbage Union monsters. We have Heavy Mech Support, Platform, and Rollout. Why the heck are these in a structure deck in 2014? I have no idea. At least now we have Oil Man. He's pretty cool. He looks like he's having a good time. He's not very good. This deck just feels weird. It doesn't feel like a structure deck, and when you put it in the context of when this was released, the structure deck before this was one of the best ones of all time, which was the Realm of Light structure deck, the one with Light Sworns. Not only did that have a ton of fantastic new cards like Raiden, Hand of Light Sworn, it had a ton of great reprints. You could buy 3 of that structure deck and just play an almost competitive Light Sworn deck. I mean, it gave you the Judgment Dragon, gave you the Lila, it gave you the Charge of Light Brigade, Solar Recharge. That deck gave you everything for a deck that was immediately relevant and is still relevant to this day, by the way. But the Geargia Rampage structure deck, not so much. It just gives you some cool Geargia reprints, but most of the deck is just garbage machine support, and it's really disappointing. If we would have got this a year earlier when people were trying to pick up Geargia and they were sort of skyrocketing in price, armors were like 15s, then people would have been excited. But the fact that this was released after Geargia Gear tells me that Konami did not plan ahead. I don't think that they did that on purpose. I think they just said, well, we have to limit Geargia Gear, but now we already have this Rampage structure deck, so I guess we got to release it. But yeah, overall, this structure deck is bad because it's badly timed, it's badly designed, and it doesn't stay on theme. So while this structure deck doesn't have as many bad cards in it as like the past structure decks that we've looked at, it definitely is not good. This was very unpopular, and I would say that I feel bad for people that went to the store, they were just getting the Yu-Gi-Oh! And they're like, what do I buy to go to locals with? And they buy this deck, and then they just get to locals, and everyone's like, why didn't you buy this Lightsworn structure deck? That would have had you actually win some games. Just really disappointing. So we haven't had one this bad in a while. This is on like a whole new level, but hopefully you enjoyed this discussion video. I haven't done a bad structure deck review in a couple months, I think 3 or 4 months. But yeah, if you want to see more, I'll consider doing more. I do want to talk about the Spellcaster Command structure deck, but we'll get to that someday. Anyway, though, I'll see you guys later. Goodbye.